Okay, so now we do something similar to the tax analysis, but a subsidy. So what are the welfare implications of a subsidy? And specifically, we assume that the subsidy is S equals 2. So the way to think about it is that when the subsidy is 2, the reservation price of each producer goes down by 2. And just like a tax would shift it up by 2, if the tax is 2, a subsidy will push it down. So if like a producer has a reservation price of, let's say, 3, that means this reservation price covers or is representative of all the costs, of all the operational expenditures. So the reservation price of 3 means it needs to cover at least operational expenses of 3. But if you get a subsidy of 2, well, that lowers it from 3 to 1. Okay, so now this was our original supply, and that is the supply plus the subsidy. Okay, so what do we see? Initially, the price, actually it's the other way around. So the upper one was our original, and here we have the supply plus the subsidy. So our original price was 6, the original quantity turned over was 4, but now the price drops to 5. And the equilibrium quantity increases from 4 to 5, and the price drops from 6 to 5. So now we can do again our welfare analysis. Okay, so we have our parameter, we have our value. So the price, we said, is 5. Okay, quantity demanded at a price of 5. Quantity demanded is 5, quantity supplied is 5, and the entire quantity turned over is now, of course, 5. So now let's take a look at consumer surplus. So consumer surplus is everything below the demand function and above the price that consumers have to pay all the way to the quantity turned over. So what I do is I'll just actually do that with a shape. Okay, so this would be consumer surplus. And let's format it. And as you can see, this green area has that green area has an area of base times height over 2, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's the height, base 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so 5 times 5 over 2, that's 12.5. Now producer surplus, so people at the cashier, they pay 5, but the producers, they get another 2 in terms of the subsidy. So the price that they actually get, and it's called the gross price, is 7. So the total producer surplus is now this area. Okay, So producer surplus is everything below the price that the producers get, and it's technically 7, because people pay 5, but then you get another 2 from the government as a subsidy above the true reservation price, or the true supply function, the supply function without the subsidy. But of course, if you want to, you could argue and say, well, this is actually the same area as this with the subsidy, but we typically display it always with respect to the true supply function. Okay, so how big is producer surplus? So producer surplus is now also 12.5, but welfare is now not 25, because you can see, because of that subsidy, we have this area where there's a lot of overlap in terms of producer surplus and consumer surplus, so we would count it twice. So what we need to do is we need to subtract the subsidy, because if you still remember, when we analyzed the tax, there was no overlap. We could clearly attribute consumer surplus and producer surplus, and then we had this gap that was tax revenues, so we didn't have to count anything twice, which is why we added tax revenues to total surplus. But when it comes to subsidy, so you see there's this entire area here where there's overlap of, so the consumer, the subsidy basically turns into consumer surplus and producer surplus because the price is lower. So we would count it twice, so we have to subtract it. So when we said that welfare or total surplus is consumer surplus plus producer surplus plus tax revenue, what we also need to do is now we have to subtract the cost of a subsidy. Cost of subsidy. Okay, so the cost of the subsidy is how much? Well, the cost of the subsidy is, because we have 5 units turned over in the market, and each unit turned over in the market carries a subsidy of 2, the entire subsidy is 5 times 2, so it will get this rectangle. So this area is so that is 10. Okay, so now what is welfare or total surplus? So that is 12.5 plus 12.5 minus 10, so that's 15. And in our reference scenario, which is the market equilibrium, we always had a welfare of 16. So in this case, we have a deadweight loss of 1. So the deadweight loss is 1. Okay, where do we see that deadweight loss? Well, the deadweight loss is obviously this triangle here. Okay, so this is the area for the deadweight loss. And in this case, what we have is we have a deadweight loss as a result of an inefficient overproduction. So the subsidy creates an inefficient overproduction. So we produce much more than what is economically efficient. And in order to illustrate that, we need to just go back again to the original reservation prices without any market distortions. So The supply function, we said is a lineup of consumers according to their willingness to pay. And at the equilibrium price of 6 and the equilibrium quantity of 4, all the consumers whose willingness to pay is greater than any producer's reservation price, they get matched and they get served. But now if we go beyond the quantity of 4, we have actually a bunch of consumers whose willingness to pay is much less than what it costs to serve them. So here the blue dots is the actual operational expenses in order to serve those green dots, which are consumers, and you can see that the operational expenses are greater than what the true willingness to pay is. So the true costs are now greater than the true willingness to pay, and that is of course inefficient. So we have a inefficiency from overproduction. So let's just summarize again. When it comes to a price floor, price ceiling, and a tax, we have seen that those market interventions led to a reduction of economic activity, and as a result of that reduction of economic activity, we lost consumer and producer surplus, and we had a deadweight loss because of a reduction of economic activity. But when it comes to subsidy, we generate a deadweight loss from too much production, and the deadweight loss is essentially the result of inefficient overproduction. We generate more, or we lure in more consumers into the market and then serve them with higher cost than what their willingness to pay is, and that is a deadweight loss from an inefficient overproduction of resources. So a subsidy also creates a deadweight loss, but it is different from, let's say, a tax where the deadweight loss is due to less than the optimal production level. In the case of a subsidy, we have a deadweight loss as a result of more than the optimum production level. Okay, so I'll just stop here, and then in the next couple of videos we'll talk about, specifically the next 2 videos we talk about externalities.